Well, it's still going, and we're still fighting for every vote. But clearly, if you look at the 100 or so polls that have been done since the election was called, I think is by far the most polls that we've ever had done. Then you've obviously got a whole range of different views, and none of them looking like the best outcome for our party. But I think what is actually happening, and of course we are all out knocking on doors every single day, is there's a lot of undecided voters who previously have voted Conservative, who are frustrated for one reason or another, and there can be very many different reasons. But it's really, but they haven't gone to another party, and that is actually the story of the doorsteps. And many people are probably telling you that because it is the story of the doorsteps, where particularly where you've got, a Conservative held seat that has had a lot of Conservative voters in the past. So what we're trying to do is make sure we get round to as many of those voters as possible. I have pub tours, I have community, I've got a village hall tonight. We get round obviously each individual doorstep and just try to speak to as many people as possible, because that very much helps with the make a decision. And clearly what they need to do, and it's less than a week to go, is taxes always are important to people, and they're particularly important when we've had a pandemic. We've obviously got a lot of things we need to pay for, but the fact that there are only tax rises in the Labour manifesto, no tax cuts, and only tax cuts in the Conservative manifesto, no tax rises, is actually the message that we're really trying to make sure that people are aware of. And if that's important to you for your family finance,
hang on a second, because Labour have said they will not put up VAT income tax. And so they're not going to put up tax. That's
they've said there's 3 taxes that they won't put up, but all the other 18 they've been asked about, they haven't confirmed one way or another.
Well, they are going to keep fiscal drag when it comes to taxing. When it comes to income tax, which is the third one, they're going to keep fiscal drag, which is what the Conservatives brought in, which is why we now have the highest tax burden for 70 odd years. So that's under the Conservative watch.
Well, what we did under the Conservative watch is, under the last Labour government, the allowance before you started paying tax was just over £6,000, and that had stayed the constant for a long time during the last Labour government. What we did is we put it up to £12,500, and it's now £12,750. So we put a massive jump into the personal allowance.
There's been a massive jump in inflation under your watch as well, and that's one of the reasons why it had to go up.
Yeah. Well, you can thank Vladimir Putin and his invasion of Ukraine for that. But of course, now
a lot of people
managed to get that down to 2%.
A lot of people thank Liz Truss for that, don't they?
No, well, that's not true. If you look all over the world, Liz Truss was nothing to do with other countries where the inflation went up in exactly the same way. So, you have to be honest, and you have to understand economics as well. The energy spike, which caused a huge spike in inflation, which is now very quickly, probably a year ahead of schedule, down to 2%, which is normal. And that's a year ahead of schedule. And I think that's a lot to do with the restraint that we've shown in terms of spending in the last year or so.
If you understood economics, you'd know that it's actually got a lot to do with the Bank of England, which is independent of the government, and the way they manage interest rates. That's the real reason why inflation has come down, if you're economically literate.
Well, actually, it is the feeding in of because what they do is they look at the economics. Theirs is a decision point, but what they do is they look at all the economic factors and all the prices. So the fact that the energy price spiked is why it went up. The fact the energy price then was brought down due to lots of other measures being put in place and lots of other supply opening up was why it then fed into them making the decision to keep it up. But it's not to keep it to put it down. But it's not just the energy; it's also other things as well. But yes, it is an independent decision. But all of the actions of, as I say, Vladimir Putin, but also the actions the government has taken to restrain public spending, all of those have an impact on where we've got to, which is thankfully for all of your listeners, back down to normal, so that all of that sort of crazy period of inflation, which, was all over the world and was caused by energy price shock, has now got back to normal, is under control. And that makes a big difference because, you know, it has been difficult for people. It has caused increase in prices, and it will now hopefully alleviate some of that. And
let's
you know,
talk.
that's
Let's
we're
talk.
turning the corner.
As your education secretary at the moment, let's talk about the economics of our schools. The Institute for Fiscal Studies says the investment on a per pupil basis has been absolutely flat since 2010, when it had hit record highs prior to that. That's a big failing of yours, isn't it, to spend enough money on one of the most fundamentally important things that we have, which is education?
So if you take the right years, first of all, 2010 was a bumpy year. And if you take the right years and include the money that we've got for the pay rise of last year, we are spending more in any way you look at it, real terms per pupil on our schools than we ever have before, £60.7 billion. And now that is more. In 2010, we were spending £35 billion. So no matter how you adjust it, it is now higher per pupil, or in terms of real terms, taking into account inflation, than it's been before. Now, I accept that hasn't been
the IFS is wrong, Gillian Keegan, do you? The IFS have got their figures wrong this time, have they?
I think the IFS, you're using a report that doesn't take into account the monies that go in this September, which are already agreed and already
they're looking at the previous
budget.
14 years, which is pretty important. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, the reason it's important to put this in as well is because it was quite a big increase because of the higher than expected teachers' pay rise, the highest in 30 years at 6.5%. So that was higher than under any Labour government. So it's important because if you don't include that money, then it wouldn't make sense. So it is important because we've committed that money and it's in the budgets, because of course we'll be paying teachers more, as well as increasing the starting salary for every teacher starting across the country to £30,000, which is already in and has come in place from last September. So if I don't include the money for those two things, then it would skew the figures. If you do include the money for those two things, it is the highest budget we've had in our country's history on schools.
Because if you speak to heads, as I have, and I'm sure you have as well, they're struggling to get teachers. They're struggling to get cover for teachers when they go off sick. There just aren't enough in the system. I know you'll say you're investing in bringing on more, but again, you've had 14 years to do that.
Well, actually, the 14 years it hasn't been uniform. So sometimes over the 14 years, we're able to look very far ahead in teaching because we can follow the demographics very carefully. So in terms of a long-term workforce plan, it's organic in teaching, so we can see what we need ahead. And so some years we've actually had more applications than there've been roles. So it's not been the same over 14 years because it does differ. And it also differs between primary and secondary, and it also differs in subject. Where there is genuinely an issue is in shortage occupation subjects at secondary. These are maths, computer sciences, and modern foreign languages. Largely, it does differ some years with different subjects, but they're largely the things that are always a challenge. So what we've done there, and the plan is already in place, is, as I say, raising the starting salary to £30,000, and for maths and computer science and all those other subjects, put in an extra £6,000 on the starting salary to make it more competitive. And that's only just come in, and we think that's having there's some early signs that that's having a good impact.
Listen, we're nearly out of time. I just want to very quickly ask you about the betting situation that seems to be engulfing your party at the moment, where they're betting on the outcome of the election, MPs betting against themselves to win, or indeed betting on the Conservatives to win. How come so many MPs are gamblers? Are you?
Well, I don't know. I'm not, and I've not placed a bet. It takes me all my time to place a bet if I'm at a horse race. So no, it's not something that I do. And actually, I would say probably the way you're characterising it is not right. I don't know if most MPs are or not. I mean, clearly some will be. And betting is part of what many people do. And if you're placing a bet on an unknown outcome, then that's something that people do all day, every day. But obviously, where it's a problem is if you're placing bets on inside information, and that's where there's very, very clear that shouldn't happen. So I can't comment because literally I don't place bets on anything, least of all politics.
Gillian Keegan, thank you so much.
Thank you.